So good morning, everybody, and good evening, depending on where you are logged in from. So the agenda for the meeting today is to look at opportunities for improving the business game with SAP Application Management. And this is largely based on our experiences doing this kind of service for a pretty long time, as well as some analyst studies and kind of information that we have pulled in from ASUG, the SUGEN metrics, and other Gartner, Forrester, and other studies that we have also reviewed from. So to quickly give you an agenda overview, like what we are looking at, as you would have received from the webinar invite also, the expected takeaways largely are to give a guideline of some of the best practices in terms of working with a partner for SAP AMS, and outline that will give you some of the key metrics that you should focus on, and then a couple of a customer example with some key learnings from that. That is the main thing that we are trying to leverage as a part of this. If you look at the focus would be to see some of the key how-tos of expectation setting, monitoring and control, and how to do transition more effectively, how to do sustenance more effectively, the key metrics around that, and what are the major phases when you kind of engage in an application management service engagement with a partner. If you look at it, most of these kind of engagements start off with a pretty big bang, pretty grandiose expectations in terms of what you want to achieve and accomplish. But at the end of it all, it is going to boil down to focusing on the simplistic activities that are going to make this whole thing successful. The concept of keep it simple and straight, that is going to be ringing true throughout the conversation that we're going to have today. And that again is based on some of our experiences, and what we're going to talk about more and more is what are the key metrics and what are the major phases and what are the key metrics in those major phases that you want to focus on. That is really going to be the name of the game. At the end of this webinar, if you're able to leverage some of this collaboration framework that we have developed, what are the kind of areas that you should be zooming in on, that would really be the expected takeaway from our side. Okay, and again, quoting our friend Mr. Scott Adams, one of the main things that we always hear is that there are quite a few things that are a little bit hidden in terms of in what works in the IT world and what does not work in the IT world. What are the accomplishments based on which you can kind of qualify or quantify a partner's contribution is really something that a lot of firms struggle. And from that angle, we are trying to identify how and what are the different ways in which you could measure the progress of a partner's engagement and the way in which you're collaboratively working with them, so that you can kind of maximize the opportunities, maximize the possibilities in an application management engagement with a partner. So with that agenda set, I'll just give you a little bit of background based on our analysis. Why do organizations go for this kind of partner-driven, partner-collaborated AMS? One of the main things that always comes up is the cost and coverage, whether obviously the total cost of ownership, reducing that, and being able to provide coverage to a time zone, to a breadth of skill that you currently don't have, or maybe that you have but you don't have enough number of people to be able to provide that. So basically complementing and supplementing your internal team. The fact that you are looking from the partner to bring in various methodologies and expertise in engaging in a model, something similar to that, because that again is not your core competency, that's a core competency of a supplier who specializes in things of that nature. And last but not the least, some level of flexibility, reliability, and scalability. As your organization grows, as you start expanding your footprint to newer locations, how you could leverage your application management team to also expand their horizon of knowledge. They are already exposed to your internal environment, your SAP environment, how you do business within SAP. So how that can be expanded in order to, when you start going into new locations, new countries, new businesses as you acquire them, how that you can flexibly, reliably scale to manage those expectations. Now again, on these, there are some specific sub-items that would come in also that would be quite critical, but suffice to say that these are the main things that we have identified, and the analysts also have re-emphasized as the key thing why a typical customer would go for a partner collaborated AMS kind of an engagement. Now, not all AMS engagements are successful, and this is something that you would see time and again. Just like not all of SAP's implementation, some of them have challenges like as they go through it. Similarly, in an AMS engagement also, there are a few that go well. There are a few like that don't go as per expectations. And this again comes from various research analysts like Forrester, Gartner, all of them. They can kind of reference the same thing. Whereas there are quite a few different numbers that come out. So what is it that differentiates successful AMS engagement from an unsuccessful or not so successful AMS engagement? And what are the kind of early watch alerts, like again borrowing SAP's terminology, what are the EWA alerts that you can get way up front to determine whether your SAP AMS engagement with a partner is going to go south or whether it is going to go in the direction that you are looking for it to go. So the focus of this webinar is to give you a framework of metrics at different phases in the engagement cycle so that you can look at it and see what kind of control measures you can put in place so that your overall AMS experience is successful. Okay. If you look at, again, another study from Gartner, the main thing that they are looking at is consensus and clarity from a business process perspective or a business user expectations perspective, unambiguous requirements, like and make sure that there is not too much amount of ambiguity, in terms of what you are looking for and what you are trying to get the partner to do. Keep it simple and straight. Now, at the end of it all, as you will go through and as we run through some of the metrics and some of the other expectations that you can look at, there are a lot of things like that you could kind of throw back to the partner, that you can tell them that, hey, we want to reduce costs. Right from the first trimester of engagement, like we would like to improve the efficiency of our operations overall. We would like to improve the inventory carry costs and various things of that nature. But it is a matter of being realistic and being setting the right expectations at the right time with the partner. So again, going back to focusing on the big picture, getting the level of management commitment, getting the internal team's involvement, choosing the right partner. But what we are going to focus more and more in this conversation is to do proper expectation setting, monitoring and control, how to do an effective transition, how to ongoing how to do ongoing reviews of the sustenance efficiency, and last but not the least, the holy grail of all AMS, which is go beyond the core AMS, which is core AMS benefit, which would be apart from sustenance, how can you also look at improving business process solutions and the key metrics from that, like DSO and some of these other inventory carry metrics, and how you can start leveraging some of that. With that background set, now we spent about 5 minutes trying to understand what are the different things that are driving a typical organization to go AMS, and what are the things that they are expecting, and what we are going to zoom in on in this presentation. So let us categorize what are the different scenarios that are typically facing us when we talk about an AMS transition, and let us analyze what we should be looking for in these scenarios. Here again, you want to look at what are the expectations that you want to set with your internal team, what are the expectations that you can set with the supplier, and some of the best practices on how to set these expectations. I will, there are some speaker notes available on this, which will also be published at the end of this call. One of the main things that we are looking at these levels is to have the clear expectations set with the team, the internal team as well as the supplier team, that this is not an evaluation of the supplier, of their internal individual team members that are assigned to the project, but this is actually an evaluation of how this model works for your organization. So from that angle, if you were to look at it and say that, okay, let us throw the supplier a challenge, let us see how they scale up, let us evaluate whether they have the right human capital management resource or not. So rather than it being an evaluation of individual capabilities of specific people from the supplier, it should be looked at more as an evaluation of how this engagement model, how your collaboration with the partner is going to work. And that is something that you want to set very clearly with your internal team so that they don't look at the first hurdle or the first speed bump and then kind of backtrack and say, hey, this is too much pain. We really don't want to do this. Rather than that, there is enough amount of value and money invested into this program so that they go forward and go, get over the hump. In a similar token, you can also set some expectations with the supplier. Now, we know that in the IT industry, the concepts of attrition and turnover of resources is something that is quite common. And also, as we talked about at the beginning, this is a kind of engagement where you would anticipate that as your engagement grows, as your SAP footprint grows, the partner also grows along with you and starts scaling up to provide new resources, new scales, and new skills and new capabilities to deliver. So from that angle, how can you reduce the amount of your internal team's time, energy, and bandwidth being spent is one of the key things that you want to set as an expectation with the supplier. So that after you do the initial knowledge transition, it doesn't become the responsibility of your internal team again going forward to do ongoing knowledge transitions whenever a new person joins in the supplier's team, or as you roll out your footprint to a new location, you don't want to have to spend time onboarding a new project team which is going to be responsible for rolling out the new location. So from that angle, there are quite a few expectations that you can set with the supplier team also. The best practices on how to set expectations are, again, the holy grail of all change management and organization change management diktats. Those are the same things that apply in this particular case as well. In terms of being clear, crisp, and upfront in terms of establishing the expectations both with the internal team as well as with the customer team. Zooming on to some of the different types of transitions. Again, if you look at it, you could transition at the time of an implementation, where it's an implementation to support transition. There are different activities that are critical in such a transition. That is not going to be the focus of this presentation because that is a different ballgame altogether, and we could run a separate webinar just on looking at what are the key focus areas, what are the key metrics to look at, what is the concept of hypercare support like immediately after go live, how does that transition from the implementation team to the support team, and what are the metrics, what are the handover processes. So we don't want to go into that because that is a different animal altogether. What we're going to talk about more and more in this conversation is a midstream support team transition, which is from an incumbent supplier to a new supplier. For various reasons, you might be making that shift, or from an internal team which is doing the support currently for for strategic reasons, so that your internal team gets focused on other activities you are trying to transition to a new supplier. And that really is a zoom in that we want to do during the course of this conversation. Andrew, I hope the pace is okay. If there is something specific that you want to add in here in terms of space or the clarity of voice, let me know.
No, I'm reading you loud and clear, RK, and we had a few mute issues initially, so I apologize on behalf of the team for that, but we've clarified those. So
okay.
Please continue.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So in a typical transition, now I know that ITIL has its own sets of terminologies that they typically use when they start looking at methodology. I know Run SAP, which is the model that SAP is pushing for, and that has different set of terminologies. At the end of it all, the main thing that comes out of it is a proper definition of the scope, a proper transition, which again is broken up into designing what is the kind of operations they're going to do, setting up that operation, and then actually transitioning it. And then there's a phase of stabilization, and then there's an optimization phase. Again, if you look at it, there are some specific imperatives at each of these phases. During the due diligence and scope establishment, you're really looking at the end of the day, what is the kind of team that is required to support this? That depends on the size of the system, the user base, and the nature of activities. You can have a 20-page questionnaire in which you could give all the information, or you can have a due diligence session that is conducted. And again, we will talk about some metric that you can look at on each of these particular phases in terms of how you can see whether your AMS transition is on the right path or not. Those are the key metrics that we will share with you at the end of this conversation. The transition activity itself is kind of split into two separate activities. There is a knowledge acquisition, and then there is a process ownership transition. The reason why we have looked at this more as a knowledge acquisition rather than knowledge transition is because there might be some kind of issues related to the knowledge transition being actively pushed by the incumbent supplier, because there might be some hostilities involved. So from that angle, the supplier that is going to take up the responsibility of the environment going forward, it is that supplier's responsibility to be proactive, to ask the right questions to the incumbent supplier, so that they can get the knowledge acquired properly. So from that angle, we would like to look at this more as a pull mechanism in which we are acquiring the knowledge rather than a push mechanism wherein you as an internal team is pushing the knowledge over to the partner who is taking over the responsibility. And there again, there are various best practices that we have established, and that is something that we can share as case studies at the end of the conversation. The second part of it in transition really is the process ownership transition. Here again, it is not that one fine day, whatever team is supporting today is going away and there's a new team that is coming in that is supporting. It has to be a smooth transition so that the end users, the business community itself does not feel the pinch. It is it's a black box to them with respect to who is supporting it. They are getting this. Here again, there are metrics that you can look at to see whether those things are being achieved or not, and those are real-time metrics. Those are metrics that will give you the pulse so that you can go back and take the necessary corrective and preventive action and fix things as you go along. Then we come to what we call as the stabilization phase. This is the phase when you are going to look at the transition effectiveness, and that is where you want to look at the ticket volumes, whether the ticket volumes are increasing or are they decreasing, and whether the number of open tickets are stabilized or not. And then the last phase, which is the phase wherein you're going to improve the efficiency of the team, improve the efficiency of the solution that is provided, and those are the areas wherein you are looking at enhancing the, reducing the TCO, increasing the ROI. Those kind of concepts start coming in phases 2 and 3. Okay. Now, key metrics, like there are enough number of metrics to go around, and you can build the most beautiful of dashboards, and you could have a pointy-headed boss can kind of come back and give you all the stuff that you are looking for. But again, as Mr. Dogbert has to say here, it is a matter of zooming in on the right level of data. So if you're going to start pulling in information at a very granular level, the possibility that it might not be accurate is going to be quite high, and there is too much for you to focus on, so the effectiveness that you might have on zooming in on the right metrics is going to be lesser. So from that angle, it is going to be a matter of which metrics should we focus on and what dashboard is going to give you the right level of metrics. So here we are going to borrow some of the studies done by organizations like Sujan, which is SAP's user community, and this is again a subset of what ASUG has been doing, and some of this information has come from that. What we have done as an organization is to start looking at these challenges in terms of business continuity, business process improvement, innovation and protection of investment, and then last but not the least, the total cost of operation, and kind of define when you want to measure these specific metrics and when you want to effect a change in them in the positive direction. So for instance, if you were to try and improve the cost per user that you have in the total cost of operations right from get-go, that is not going to be a right expectation to set with the partner, because that's going to take some time. You want to measure it, however, during phase 1 so that you can see what is the baseline and then start improving it during the phase 2 of the implementation, the phase 3 of the implementation. So from that angle, if you look at it, these are the key challenges that are in front of a typical CFO or CIO or CTO, in terms of continuing business, using the SAP environment, reduce the number of days without outage, and there are some downstream metrics or downstream measures that you can focus on to accomplish each one of these particular metrics and measurements. So if you look at it again, if you go back to the concept of keeping it simple, don't pick and choose all these metrics. Pick and choose 2 or 3 or 4 vital statistics metrics, which are the ones that you focus on reporting to your steering committee on the customer side as well as the supplier side, so that the right amount of focus is given to the right topics of conversation. Now, this is a slide wherein I'm going to spend some amount of time wherein we are going to look at the phase-wise prioritization of metrics. As we talked about, there are 4 generic phases, which are the knowledge transition or the knowledge acquisition phase. There is stabilization phase. There's optimization phase 1 and an optimization phase 2, which is basically focused on solution efficiencies. Typically, during the knowledge transition phase, this is the phase where you can do the maximum amount of early watch analysis to see whether all the knowledge that needs to be transitioned to the new team is being successfully executed or not. Now, how do you do that? There are different ways in which you could do that. One of the key things that we have observed is to start identifying different process areas, maybe start listing them as process areas. Maybe you could, that is currently the business process master list that you have implemented in your organization by location, by country, by site, various sub-classifications of that, and that could be the granular level at which you want to do the knowledge transition or the knowledge acquisition to be done by the team. So from that angle, start looking at that and start having some measures and metrics in terms of how much of that has been successfully transitioned. Now, this is something wherein you want to have the team that is kind of transferring the knowledge as well as the team that is acquiring the knowledge to both sign off to ensure that, hey, I have got all of this information so that I'm in a position to start supporting your environment from this particular day onwards. So this metric at the way up front becomes a good metric for you to measure on a weekly basis to see whether your knowledge transition is happening in the right format or in a successful way or not. The second phase, which is the stabilization phase, wherein you are just transition from an existing supplier or the existing team to a new team. the key thing there is to ensure that the end user, the business, does not really suffer. And how do you do that? Like, again, you can look at the response time, the resolution time, and the various other metrics, subcategorize that by the priority of tickets and various other things. But if you want to keep your pulse on two major critical vital statistics, these are the two that we would recommend. Look at the number of open tickets at the end of each week. If the number of tickets that your team is able to resolve is higher than the number of tickets that the users are able to create, you are in good shape. But if, for instance, like the number of tickets that are being created by the end user community is something that your team is not able to resolve, that is going to result implicitly in SLA slippage, in resolution time slipping, various other factors that will have a downstream impact. So just by looking at this metric, whether the number of open tickets at the end of the week on week, if you keep measuring that, that is kind of coming down, that is going to give you a pulse. Here again, you can get innovative. You can zoom in on that, like by business communities, business units, so that you know which units are doing well, which units, like, and there might be some escalation because, hey, in China, like, and there is an increased number of tickets that are coming in the SD module. So from that angle, there's some additional attention that needs to be done. So here again, just by keeping your pulse on this one metric, you can really zoom in on the stabilization phase quite effectively. The second thing really is about the level of internal team involvement. At the end of the day, one of the main things that is going to make it successful is if your internal team does not have to spend time, hand-holding the new team like on an ongoing basis. So keep a pulse on how your internal team's time is being spent. So this need not be another timesheet mechanism or timesheet tracking. It might be just to state that like the level of involvement in individual tickets, whether like I had to spend just approval time, or whether I had to spend actually like giving them the solution, or if what they gave as a solution was totally bad and we had to redo the entire solution. So some metrics of that nature could be, some measurements of that nature could be captured, and that could be reported in. And again, here you can keep it straight and simple. So if you look at it, the primary objective of the stabilization phase is to reduce the amount of dependency on your team, and at the same time ensure that the end user community does not see an increased number of open tickets, which really is a reflection on the resolution efficiencies. Once that is done, you get into the optimization phase, when you're looking at now the system efficiencies. You're okay with the team efficiency. The team is able to handle whatever is being thrown at them, like by the support team, by the user community. Now you are going to look at how to reduce the number of new tickets being created. Here you are going to do some of the root cause analysis, going in and finding out, okay, in this particular area there are new tickets that are coming in. What can be done to reduce the number of them? Here, then the second part of it would be break up by the nature of tickets. How many tickets are enhancements? How many of them are data related, training related, and security related? These are just some categories that we have suggested, but this is probably the second most important metric that you want to look at. You still want to continue to look at the level of internal team involvement. Ideally, that should taper down, and the internal team should be largely involved in architectural roles in terms of ensuring the sanctity of your system overall, as well as doing the approval activities. Last but not least, depending on the kind of engagement model that you have with the partner, you could also insist on some kind of a team utilization by module and by nature of work, so that you know that the amount of time, effort, and money that is going into keeping the lights on, and how much of it is going towards improving the overall system efficiencies, you can start measuring it. And if you're spending lesser and lesser time in terms of keeping the system live, as opposed to spending more money and effort on improving the quality of the system, that is really what you are going to be zooming in on. Then you get on to the last phase, where you are looking at overall solution effectiveness, where you can start looking at various business KPIs. This again is something that you have to work with the partner way up front in terms of what is feasible, what is not feasible. Maybe things like reducing the inventory carry, or in the DSO and things of that nature. There again, you could look at measuring that by zooming in on the number of proactive suggestions made per month, by categorized by the nature of suggestion. There are different metrics that you can look at. Now, the reason why these metrics we have chosen is because what you started off as a journey at the beginning of the whole operation was to look at reducing the total cost of your operation, which was something that you needed to accomplish. That you needed to reduce the amount of internal teams involvement in these activities, and in the eventual long term, like you wanted to extract more from your SAP investment, maybe look at some features that you have so far not utilized, etc., etc. Okay, so from that angle, like these are the key metrics that we have zoomed in on, we have utilized quite efficiently in some of our engagements, and that is what we would recommend to our customers also. Okay. From that point, if you were to venture to the next level of granularity in terms of from the CXO level metrics, if you were to accomplish those, there are various IT manager level measurements that you want to take so that you can accomplish those. Here again, there are a bunch of them. A lot of this we have picked up from some of the Run SAP diktats, like some of the things that we have picked up from our experience also. But here again, as you can see, there's a plethora of matrices that are available. You really do not want to kind of zoom in on all of them. Pick and choose the ones that are critical to you. Here again, there are a few recommendations from our side that you could look at as your initial zoom point. Same thing again from an incident and change management. Again, you look at the number of incidents at different stages, the percentage of major incidents, which again becomes a critical thing. Overall, if you can reduce the number of high-impact incidents, number of incidents that kind of break down your business, those are things that should come down over time. So measuring and keeping a pulse on that is one of the key things that we would recommend as a part of this engagement. The other key one could be the average cost per incident, again categorized by complexity as well as criticality of the incident becomes a good measure. In the continuing on the incident change management, if you look at it, like there are various things that you could look at from a break fix, time that is spent in break fix, minor enhancement, new functionality. Similarly, the number of urgent corrections that we talked about earlier. Last but not the least, like one of the slides that we talk about is the custom code. And as we would know, like lot of SAP environments are. So like I'm looking at whether the custom code maintenance is being done in a proper manner or not is something that you could look at using some other metrics also. Okay, so given that, like I would kind of zoom through to the this slide where like I would leave behind for you because there's, as you can see, there's quite a lot of detail. Given the amount of time that we have, I would like to spend some amount of time going through a representative case study, in terms of some of these measures, like and how we put that to use and how that is successful in some of our engagements. So maybe you could, some of these particular topics might resonate with you depending on your existing state of affairs in terms of what you're doing on your AMS, how you're doing it. But the objectives of the engagement that we started off for this particular representative case study, again, we're not quoting the name of the customer. We're keeping it as a simplistic and a generalized case study. This is something that we want to share with you as our experience. But again, this is something where we have utilized some of these techniques, we have utilized some of these measurements, and we would leave behind some of these metrics also for your utilization going forward. If you look at the key objective of this engagement, as we started off with them, was to provide significant amount of scalability to support, maintain, and evolve as the SAP is rolled out to new locations. So this is an organization which was on the growth path, like I'm looking at expanding their existing SAP footprint to new locations. Now, there was an existing US-based team that was doing a lot of these activities, but they were stretched beyond their limits, in terms of doing ongoing sustenance, as well as being called upon to do various rollout activities and various things of that nature. So from that angle, it was quite a challenge for them and their bandwidth to be able to do all of that. At the same time, that team also wanted to ensure that the sanctity of the solution that they have developed and set up, the architectural constructs, the guidelines, and the standards that they have set up is something that was stuck to, and that was not something that gets diluted as the system is rolled out to new locations. So they were looking at a partner who would engage with them and establish a framework that will give them the core AMS, the application support activities, as well as ongoing application management, so that when they roll out and expand their footprint to new locations, this same team will kind of like carry the torch, go to the new locations, put up like the SAP framework there, as well as like ensure that the sanctity of the system and the architecture is kind of taken care of. If you look at the volume of tickets, like initially it was much lesser than 600, and then later on when we took up the responsibility of not just India, of the North America, Latin America, and Indian geography, then it was close to about 600 tickets per month was the average volume that was coming in. There were standard tools that they were using, including CA Service Desk and Solution Manager. There were various tools that they had internally. Again, the key emphasis, as you can see here, is not which tool you use, but like and what are the specific measures and metrics that you identify and zoom in on to accomplish the objectives that you have. If you look at like the overall objectives of this organization, they wanted to reduce the amount of time that they had to spend. So from that angle, the internal tools for time tracking, as well as like some of the service desk utilities, were kind of modified a little bit so that they can capture some of these key measures. They can measure, they can capture some of these key metrics so that they can measure at the end of the day whether they are accomplishing what they started out with as an objective or not. In terms of their team structure, like they had business subject matter experts as the first line of defense, with the YASH team as like in the second tier, and a US-based team playing the central role of architects. This again is a structure that the organization had. Again, there is nothing sacrosanct about it, but the main thing is to have these three identified in some way or fashion. So from that angle, as a part of our organizational change management, we had various discussions with them at various stages during this due diligence of scope finalization, during the transition phase, during the stabilization phase 1 and phase 2. So from that angle, like there were various structures like in based on which this information was provided, and we use some of the specific things that we talked about earlier. In terms of like the key impact, like, and I will just touch upon the key impact on the what we were able to accomplish using that was a higher responsiveness to the business overall. That was a key thing that they were able to accomplish. Higher adherence to the central standards as they were rolling out to new locations. The new locations, when you go into the country-specific requirements and challenges, there were obviously like additional things that they were looking for. So to ensure that the central architecture standards were not being compromised was one of the key things, and we are already like able to reduce the number of open tickets. Here again, the key thing was to focus on the key measures. We had like 6 key measures that we were looking at, that we zoomed in on, that we kind of like identified and optimized right from the beginning. If you look at the key metrics and measures, like there were 2 major ones. By the statistic number 1 was the number of open tickets at the beginning of the week, at the end of the week. Was it increasing or was it decreasing? And again, start looking at the second line, which is the number of new tickets that are being created. That becomes your phase 2 measure to see like whether that is kind of going up or going down. So from that angle, on an ongoing basis, we were in a position to go in, look at the number of metrics, look at the number of open tickets at the end of the week, see that, okay, the team is performing well. In the initial stages, as you can see, the number of tickets increased during the first 2 weeks, and then we had to put in some corrective action. Okay, like, and this is a time wherein like the new team was not, coping up with some of the specific things that were coming in. So we had to do some additional training, and this is, by doing this early watch and early watch alerts, like by looking at the right metrics at the right time, we were able to report at the end of the month, like, and that we were able to accomplish the right trend from the metrics, or rather from the number of open tickets metrics. Similar token, like when we start looking at the number of new tickets that are being created, this was not at all a measure that we were zooming in on during the first month. That was a measure that we were looking at only from the 3rd month onwards in terms of reducing the number of open tickets, number of new tickets created. The other one was like I'm really looking at the number of tickets that were being escalated to the other groups. As you can see, during the first 2 weeks, there was a higher number of tickets that were being escalated, and then it started stabilizing towards the end of the month, when the number of tickets being escalated comes down. Here again, it is largely a matter of like confidence of the team in resolving tickets, as well as the nature of tickets that are being sent across. The second key vital statistic is to look at the amount of internal team involvement from the customer side. How much amount of time is being spent, how many tickets are the internal team members having to spend their time on getting their hands dirty, irrespective of having a support partner to whom they had given all this knowledge transition. So from that angle, this was something again that goes a long way in showing back to your internal community, stating that, hey, after we have established this, the amount of time and energy and effort that you have to spend in terms of supporting our environment has come down, which again goes a long way towards proving what we have been talking about so far. In conclusion, the main thing that we want to talk about here is to focus on what you want to accomplish, set the right expectations on the right set of metrics at the right phase. Rather than like looking at having too many metrics that you wanted to zoom in on at every different stage, but look at the right metrics, right expectations at the right phase, and have metrics that we have shared with is something that we would recommend, and you could look at take it away as a part of this presentation. I know this is being recorded, as well as this webinar is available on ASUG, so you could pull out some of this information from there. And as again Scott Adams would say, a lot of the stuff is about focusing on the right things. For instance, it's not really critical to, at some point or the other, feeding the squirrels by the east entrance is critical or not, but that is not really the focus of this this team. So from that angle, the last thing that I would say is also to work on the right expectations, right metrics, right phase with the right team members and the right team that you're engaging with. That's all I had from my side, Andrew. I will pass the mic back to you for questions that somebody might have.
Thank you, RK. That was very impressive. There's a lot of material that you covered there, and we did have a couple of questions come in. So I think I will just prepare those, and I'll read those out to you, and if you can do your best to answer those, that would be appreciated. Number one is, can you give me some estimated metrics on how much cost savings your customers or a particular customer, if you can cite a case, saw in the first year participating in an outsourced AMS relationship?
Good question, Andrew. Now, in general, this is a number that varies depending on the kind of engagement that we are getting into, the state of affairs that the customer is already in. If they're already, in a stabilized phase of an environment, and that actually can reduce the typical cost savings. But normally, what we have seen is anywhere from 30 to 50%, depending on what stage of SAP AMS evolution they are in. You could look at cost savings to that degree. If they have already started doing a lot of outsourcing and offshoring and some of that, and your system is already stable, you would be looking more in the range of about 15 to 25%. But if it is something that you are starting off on the first, as an initial engagement, anywhere from 30 to 50% during the first year is a reasonable expectation. During the second and subsequent years, you could you would start stabilizing further, and you would see that that plateauing out. But more importantly, it is a matter of the first year wherein you are stabilizing the environment. The total cost of operation reduction is something that you want to zoom in on at the end of the year, and during the second year is when you will start realizing a lot of the investments that you would have made, in terms of accomplishing that. Did I answer that, Andrew?
I think you did. Thank you. Second question. On the case study cited, did you use the client service desk or your own?
In this particular case, because the customer had a pretty large footprint already and they were a diverse organization, we ended up using the customer's internal service desk. We did have some of our best practices that we kind of shared with the customer, so that there were some tweakings and modifications that were done to the internal service desk that the customer was already using, but it was largely the customers. We did have some other case studies wherein we had our internal case service desk also, but this specific one that we showcased was a situation wherein we had used a customer's service desk.
Okay, great. Thank you. Third question. I realize that the knowledge transfer durations vary depending on the number, size, and complexity of the outsourced applications. But what would you say is an average duration based on what you are seeing with your customers?
Typically, again, as you kind of answered the question in your statement that it depends on the complexity and the size and various other things. The other thing that we would add in also is the number of geographic locations that you're supporting, because each geographic location would have its own additional complexities. So there are about 5 or 6 key parameters that influence in the level of complexity. The main thing is the level of customization, the key modules implemented in the VPML list that you would have, the geographic locations, the user base, and the historical ticket volume, which again, the historical ticket volume gives you a sense of the stability of the system. A stable system is easier to transition than a system that is still evolving. So from that angle, these are the key indicative factors that decide what is the typical duration. But in our experience, a duration might range anywhere from 5 to 12, 13 weeks or so. That is a safe time for us to acquire the knowledge, because we are looking at more of pulling the knowledge from the existing team or the team that is moving away, and then establishing a framework so that we not just do the knowledge acquisition, but a smooth process transition. So anywhere from 5 to 13 weeks, depending on some of the complexities and other parameters that we talked about.
Great, thank you. I don't have any more questions at this time. I'm going to wait about 30 seconds to see if somebody else wanted to ask an additional question. Sometimes questions beget other questions. So in the interim, I do want to mention to all attendees that this broadcast is being and has been recorded. This will be available on our website later on this week or early next. And for all intents and purposes, if I don't have any further questions, RK, if you wanted to sum up anything, I'd give you a chance to do that now. If there are other panelists who wish to offer any opinions, I would encourage you to do that now. Otherwise, I will close the broadcast.
From my side, as I said, nothing more to emphasize that, a typical partner collaboration that we have seen is as much a success for the partner as well as the customer internal team. And you want to have the right measures, the right, dashboard so that you can see whether it is going in the right direction or not. And hope in this particular session, we have given you some of the indicators that you could look at based on our experience, that can be leveraged to see whether your AMS collaboration with a partner is going in the right direction or not. Thanks for the opportunity, guys.
Thank you, RK. On behalf of YASH Technologies and ASUG, I would like to thank everyone for taking this hour out of their day to listen to the presentation. And without saying anything more, I wish everyone a happy rest of the day, and thanks again for your participation. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.